Snickers, America's favorite candy bar. Whether it comes to sponsoring the Super Bowl, the Olympics, or its good old-fashioned "you're not you when you're hungry" campaign, we can all agree that the marketing behind this candy remains unmatched. But before we delve into the company's history, let's have a look at the ingredients that each hold their own long and storied past. The Snickers bar recipe contains sweet milk chocolate, silky caramel, roasted peanuts, and of course, nougat. Originally, Snickers bars were made by pouring nougat onto a large tray, layering caramel and peanuts on top, slicing them into pieces by hand, and dipping each bar into a vat of melted chocolate. But over time, machinery took over the process. The consumption of chocolate began as a drink made of cocoa, consumed by the Mayans and Aztecs in religious rituals. They made chocolate by cooking the cocoa in a pan of boiling water and liquor until almost all of the water evaporated. Then they harvested the cocoa butter that floated to the top and used vanilla to enhance the flavor of their drinks, harvesting as far back as 6000 BC. But when the Spaniards arrived, they took vanilla and cocoa with them. And because it didn't have the same religious significance to them, Europeans began drinking cocoa regularly and experimenting with it. Eventually, Europeans began to press chocolate into solid forms. This was a very labor-intensive process. Much like other treat-making ventures at the time, men would spend hours roasting and shelling hundreds of pounds of cocoa. They also had to hand grind it. Alternatively, they could walk on a treadmill, which at the time was used as a tool for manual labor to grind much larger quantities. Anyhow, by 1875, chocolate was forever changed, thanks to the work of Swiss chocolatier Daniel Peter. Working with Nestle, whose creamery was right next door, he came up with the idea to add powdered milk to dark chocolate. By this time, the high water content was known to procure bad chocolate, but powdered milk sidestepped this issue entirely by removing the water, resulting in a smoother and sweeter chocolate taste. And soon after, many companies followed suit. And then, in 1879, another innovation made its way into the world of chocolate. In Bern, Switzerland, Rudolf Lind, who had trained as a confectioner's apprentice, bought 2 factory buildings and a roasting machine to make his own chocolate. Nor did it successfully manage to grind the product into chocolate, and hence they came away with a whitish coating that was unappealing to the consumer. He asked his brother, a pharmacist, to diagnose the problem, and was told that too much water was seeping into the chocolate, which allowed the fat to rise to the surface. So from there, he advised him to heat the roller grinder and melt the chocolate mix longer in the hope of eliminating the excess water. To this end, Lind created the conching process, which slowly turned chocolate for up to 5 days, resulting in a less bitter taste and a smoother texture. This was a revolution, as rather than just pressing the product into molds, this type of chocolate could actually be poured. And this is the moment that most would agree was the beginning of modern chocolate. But it's still generally reserved for the rich. Milk chocolate, as we now know it, was created by a name that you'll probably recognize, and it was one of the biggest challenges in his career. Story goes, Milton Hershey took an interest in chocolate when he saw a display of chocolate-making equipment at the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. At the time, he owned the Lancaster Caramel Company, but right then and there, he decided to switch to chocolate. Hershey bought and installed chocolate-making equipment in his caramel factory in Lancaster and began experimenting with the product immediately. In 1894, the same year he formally incorporated the Lancaster Caramel Company, he established the Hershey Chocolate Company as a subsidiary to make chocolate an affordable treat for all. And in his work, he sought to make milk chocolate out of fresh milk, thinking it would make chocolate tastier and keep longer. He already knew that milk could be used to make caramel, but he didn't realize just how hard it would be to make milk chocolate. Without any formal background in chemistry, Hershey had years of trial and error before he found that right formula. By adding sugar to skim milk and condensing it, Milton Hershey became the first to make milk chocolate with fresh milk. Upon the success, he sold the Lancaster Caramel Company in 1900, retaining the rights to Hershey Chocolate Company. And it would be that year that he sold his first Hershey's milk chocolate bar for a very affordable 5 cents a bar. Traditional nougat, made of honey and sugar with egg whites, is a fluffy and aerated candy that resembles fudge. It often contains fruits and nuts, which differs from the candy fillings like the ones found in Snickers, which is generally made of hydrolyzed proteins and corn syrup. When made traditionally, nougat is an intensely sweet, creamy confection with a slight marshmallow flavor. The origins of nougat are a bit muddled, but many food historians have traced them back to the Middle East, where a recipe for the treat was found in a book that dated all the way back to 10th century Baghdad. These early versions were called nave and soon spread to Spain and Italy in the 15th century due to increasing Arab presence. It later spread to France in the 17th century and America, where a version made of corn syrup was delivered. Caramel comes from the process of caramelization, which was practiced in 17th century France. It's made by cooking sugar until it turns brown and can be made sweeter by adding milk, cream, and butter. The word caramel most likely comes from the Latin word caramellis, in direct reference to sugarcane. Meanwhile, nuts originate from nearly everywhere and are available to all and quickly became a staple food. So it's no wonder that both are used as modern-day toppings, especially for sweets such as banana splits. But to be more specific, peanuts are a New World food that most likely originate from Peru or Brazil. Archaeological evidence suggests that ancient South Americans made the first peanut butter with pottery in the shape of or decorated with peanuts as far back as 3,500 years ago. As early as 1,500 BC, the Incans of Peru used peanuts as a sacrificial offering and even entombed them with their mummies to aid in the afterlife. Whereas tribes in Brazil also ground peanuts with maize to make a drink. Peanuts were first introduced to Europeans in Brazil, growing as far north as Mexico by the time the Spanish had first arrived on the continent. From there, the Spanish brought peanuts back to Europe, spreading to Asia and Africa. Peanuts thrived in Africa, but more important to our story, were introduced to North America in the early 1700s. Peanuts were first grown in Virginia and mainly used for oil, food, and cocoa substances. At the time, peanuts were challenging to grow and harvest, and for the most part were considered animal feed and food for the poor. It wasn't until the early 1800s that the peanut became a commercial crop in the United States. In fact, the plant became more popular as a food after the Civil War when the Union soldiers took a liking to them and brought them back home. Both armies subsisted on peanuts as they were high in protein. Their popularity grew again in the late 1800s when P.T. Burnham's circus traveled the country, selling roasted peanuts to massive crowds. Not long after, street vendors sold roasted peanuts nearly everywhere, especially at baseball games, as peanut production grew. The harvesting techniques were still poor, but later technological advancements in 1900 allowed for the refinement of nearly the entire process. So now that we have the basics, let's see how these ingredients became Snickers. The stories of Snickers begins with Frank C. Mars, the owner and founder of Mars Incorporated. Having already created the Milky Way, Mars was looking for another candy to set his company apart. He had heard of a treat made with nougat, peanuts, and caramel, but knew that it was missing something that could elevate it to that next level. That something, as earlier established by Hershey, was milk chocolate. So in 1930, the very first Snicker bar was introduced to the world. It was manufactured in Chicago and sold for 5 cents, but wasn't without its challenges. It launched during the Great Depression when sugar was complex and many people couldn't afford a luxury candy. As a result, candy makers experimented with new approaches, including the Curtis Candy Company, famous for Butterfinger and Baby Ruth. They began creating smaller, more affordable versions of their candy bars, using the term junior to advertise them. It wasn't long before other companies followed suit, including Mars, which began to sell junior candy bars in 1961, but it wasn't until 1968 that they became the first fun-size candy. The standard was slightly larger than the junior size, and they trademarked the term for good measure. It was at the right time too, as America began to shift towards healthier eating, and the large percentage of overweight Americans was slowly becoming noticeable. So this fun size was a kind of justifiable sin. Again, other companies, including Curtis, followed suit with the new term, but Mars objected. They took Curtis to court over their trademark, but had trouble defending the claim. To start, how do you trademark a generic term like fun, and what does it mean in the context of the trademark? To make matters even worse, another company actually trademarked the term fun in 1926, so the situation was a mess. And since Mars had never properly established the rights for the word fun or size, the court decided they could not be entitled to monopolize that combination. And hence, they lost the case, but kept trying, buying the registered trademark of fun and returning to Curtis throughout their parent company, Standard Brands Incorporated, to sue them again. When finally, in 1974, the court denied Standard Brands' motion to dismiss the case, rather, they granted a motion for a stay. Even so, nothing ever came of this case, as Mars's trademark on the word fun expired in 1998. Now, you might be wondering where the name Snickers comes from, and the story is quite amusing. You see, while operating Mars Incorporated, Frank Mars and his wife Ethel owned the 3,000-acre Milky Way farm. It was a Tennessee farm that bred ranch horses, some of which became regular sweepstakes winners, but Ethel's favorite was called Snickers, and somewhat tragically, the horse died just 2 months before the new candy was released. And so it was. The Snicker bar was named in honor of this Mars family horse. It was a fitting name, but the candy bar was called something totally different in the UK for almost 30 years. Basically, Snickers sounded eerily similar to knickers, meaning a woman's undergarment in British English. To avoid any confusion or misinterpretation, the company called it the Marathon Bar from 1967 until it was decided to unify the brand with the original name in 1990. But this name also was not of coincidence. You see, the name Marathon was chosen because of Snickers' association with sports and fueling athletes due to its high calorie count. Mars would even sponsor the 1984 Summer Olympics as the game's official snack. This, however, outraged over 200 nutritionists at the time who said that people would form false associations with Snickers as a healthy and nutritious snack endorsed by the Olympics. Even so, the Olympic Committee would accept any brand as a sponsor, with Mars having paid $5 million and a free supply of candy for athletes to help associate the product with the games. These nutritionists believed Snickers had little nutritional value and were high in sugar, fat, and calories. They also argued that this deal was particularly harmful to children, who might get the false impression that they'll become great athletes if they eat Snickers, while the nutritionist's entire agenda was to try and get children to avoid sugary snacks between meals. Even so, the candy company was quick to defend its position, providing the testimony of Dr. Daniel Rosenfield, a Mars nutritionist, who opposed this view, saying Snickers did have nutritional value, especially for athletes, because they have a greater demand for calories than the average person, especially the sedentary types. On top of sponsoring the Olympic Games, Snickers also sponsored NASCAR drivers, the FIFA World Cup, and the Super Bowl, with one of their Super Bowl commercials sparking extreme controversy. It all started on February the 4th, 2007, during Super Bowl 41. A Snickers commercial aired depicting two male mechanics accidentally kissing while sharing a Snickers and proceeding to, quote, do something manly, such as injuring themselves with a pipe wrench or ingesting motor oil to remedy the situation. In fact, it resulted in complaints of homophobia by gay and lesbian activists against Mars, with Human Rights Campaign President Joe Salmonese quoted as saying the following: "This type of jeering from professional sports figures at the sight of two men kissing feels the type of anti-gay bullying that haunts countless gay and lesbian school children on playgrounds all across the country." GLAAD President Neil Giuliano said this prejudice promoted by Snickers and the NFL is inexcusable. But it wasn't just the Super Bowl that upset people. In fact, their advertisements usually ended with Mr. T saying, quote, "Snickers, get some nuts," a catchphrase that definitely wouldn't make it in modern advertising. Anyhow, Mars has since pulled the ads, but this would not be the last time the brand stepped into controversy. In 2008, another ad aired featuring Mr. T as B.A. Baracus, the A-Team, firing a Snickers bar at a man speed walking in tight yellow shorts, calling him a disgrace to all men and that he should run like a real man. Mars released a statement saying that the ad was supposed to be funny, but humor is highly subjective, and so to play it safe, the ad was pulled after accusations of homophobia. In 2010, Snickers launched a new advertising campaign called "You're Not You When You're Hungry." featuring people turned into different people, a transformation caused apparently due to hunger. Initially, the ad ended with the tagline, "Snickers satisfies." The first Snickers commercial in this campaign featured Betty White alongside Abe Vigoda. The two were playing American football when Betty White's character returned to her usual self after eating a Snickers. More commercials later that year featured singers Aretha Franklin and Liza Minnelli, as well as comedians Richard Lewis and Roseanne Barr. And from there, the list of comedians that the brand used to endorse the product goes on and on. For example, in 2011, there was a commercial featuring Joe Pesci and Don Rickles. And in 2013, there were campaigns with Robert Williams and Bobcat Goldthwait. And then in 2014, something special happened. A commercial featuring Godzilla was released to promote the upcoming 2014 Godzilla movie. Except Godzilla didn't turn into anything after eating Snickers, as he was simply a monster to begin with. Anyhow, in 2015, Snickers Super Bowl 49 ran a Snickers commercial featuring a parody scene from the Brady Bunch. In it, Machete, played by Danny Trejo, stars alongside characters from the original show, produced to appear like they were talking to one another. And then oddly, he turns into Marsha after eating a Snickers bar, before Jan, who was played by Steve Buscemi, storms off. For Super Bowl 50, a year later, yet another Snickers commercial featured Willem Dafoe as Marilyn Monroe while filming the infamous Subway Great scene, and Eugene Levy as the fan operator. Internationally, You're Not You When You're Hungry commercials are similar to American versions, but with fewer celebrities. The UK version of the campaign usually featured British celebrities and, until 2018, featured that slogan from the Mr. T era. In 2014, Rowan Atkinson returned to the role of Mr. Bean for several Snickers commercials and cinema spots. In Latin America, the slogan was the same as in the UK version, except that men doing extreme sports turned into a famous Mexican singer. Finally, Snickers managed to stir controversy again in 2021 when a Spanish Snicker commercial showed a gay influencer asking the waiter for, quote, a sexy orange juice with vitamins A, B, and C. The waiter then handed them a Snickers ice cream, which after eating, the influencer turned into a bearded man with a deep voice. The video went viral just weeks after a slew of controversy in Spain. Snickers was accused of homophobia, with some calling for a boycott of the candy altogether. In response, Snickers pulled the ad and apologized for any misunderstanding it may have caused. But I have to point out that at this point in the script, I'm starting to suspect that perhaps brands like to stir this type of controversy. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Anyhow, the Snickers brand includes several other products, such as Snickers Mini, dark chocolate, white chocolate, ice cream bars, Snickers with almonds, Snickers with hazelnuts, Snickers with pecans, Snickers peanut butter bars, Snickers protein, and Snickers with extra caramel, as well as espresso, fiery, and sweet or salty versions. Over the years, the weight of Snickers bars has also decreased from a weight of 65.5 grams in 2009 down to just 50 grams in 2018. You might be surprised to learn that deep-fried Snickers also became a specialty throughout various fish and chip shops in Scotland in 1995, as well as American state fairs in the early 2000s. In 2006, the British Food Commission highlighted celebrity chef Anthony Thompson's Snickers pie, which contained 5 Snicker bars, among other ingredients. The commission suggested that it was one of the unhealthiest desserts ever. One slice provided over 1,000 calories, more than half a day's requirement for an average adult. In 2005, a very scary situation arose when a series of threatening letters received by Mars indicated that someone had planted 7 poisoned candy bars on shelves in New South Wales. The last letter sent included a Snickers bar contaminated with rat poison. As a precaution, Mars issued a massive recall. Tens of thousands of Snicker bars were removed from stores. But fortunately, that dark chapter aside, things are looking up in the modern day. For example, in 2020, Snickers set the Guinness World Record for the world's most extensive chocolate nut bar, measuring over 2 tons, or the equivalent of over 41,000 Snickers bars. It was made with over 1,200 pounds of caramel, peanut, and nougat, combined with 3,000 500 pounds of chocolate. This was done to celebrate the 90th anniversary of the brand, as well as the 10th anniversary of the "You're Not You When You're Hungry" commercial during the Super Bowl. The record-breaking bar took 1 week to complete, with the work of Snickers bar engineers. When all was said and done, the giant Snickers bar was cut into pieces and fully distributed for human consumption, a stipulation which in fact is a Guinness World Records requirement involving large food items. So I think by now, you'll probably agree that Snickers has had quite the wild ride. Mars makes 15 million Snickers a day, with annual global sales of Snickers at over $380 million, and is noted as the world's most popular and best-selling candy bar. A marathon edition of Snickers was sold in the UK for 3 months after 2020, paying homage to its old alias and refreshing everyone's memory as to what a powerful legacy this brand has had in the culture of countries around the world. Bringing us full circle, but if you'd like to learn more about the history of American candy, don't miss our episode on Fund It by clicking right here. Otherwise, I hope you'll help us out by subscribing, and until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.